Hey, Eric. So, Eric, first, I want to ask you a question. So, you just started a hypothetical 1 year engagement, fractional CMO. Okay. Today's day one. Let's talk about the first 90 days. And in particular, right now, what's the first problem that most of your clients need you to start fixing right away? Or what problem do they normally have, but the business doesn't even see the problem yet, but you know it's there. So you're going to go hunt it down and fix it, right? And maybe before that, tell folks a little bit about you.
Good morning, Dean. My name's Eric Siano. I'm a fractional CMO. I came out of both corporate marketing and marketing consulting.
Mm-hmm.
So I focus on two things, right? People and outcomes. People because they get the things done, outcomes because that's what we get measured on. And I've been very fortunate to work in a number of countries and number of industries. To answer your question, typically during the discovery process, we will discuss what some of the issues are. But having spent many years in consulting, I learned to lean on frameworks. And my framework is day one, understand the people, start building relationships.
Right.
Then look and see what assets they have on the ground, from people to technology to agencies to contractors that we can leverage. Then look at what is working and conversely what is not working. Then what are the client constraints in terms of, how they want to speak about themselves? And from there, go through, let's prioritize, simplify, and focus to get the things done, the outcomes that we committed to.
Joshua, hi.
Good morning.
It's morning when we record. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. And Eric, too. Also, good morning. And so the first thing you sort of like to survey or look for, or the problem that your customers typically say, oh, thank God you're here, even though it's day one, please take this off my plate, right? What is that problem? And also let people know a little bit about you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me here today.
Yeah.
So I'm Josh Rockoff. I'm a growth-focused fractional executive in consumer packaged goods, consumer and retail. I've worked in distressed, turnarounds, restructurings, and special situations. Channels I leverage include wholesale, marketplaces, D2C, Amazon, Walmart, and a bunch of brands people have heard of. These days, I get called in by businesses, investors, and families to speed up their sales growth cost effectively, especially when they plan to sell sometime in the near future. The answer to your question is actually fairly straightforward. One of the big things that I actually look at is who's the customer. Most of the time you identify a problem, the CEOs and the board are really very focused on it. It doesn't matter the size of the business. And a lot of times they're not actually selling to the right customer or selling to the customer that actually is buying the product or the service. And that's where I've actually found my special sauce, is really understand who that customer is, what they buy, where they buy, how they buy, how are they even getting there in the first place? What are the mediums that they're buying, through? What products do they not buy? What products do they not really identify with? The idea is basically, who's your best customer, who's your worst customer. That is a concept that Peter Drucker invented. I will admit I've been trying to disprove him for the better part of my career, and it failed miserably.
Well, good luck with that. Yeah, good luck with that.
Exactly. So, and that's really just, the opportunity. You understand who your best customers are, the people who want to be your best customers, the whales, minnows concept. You work through that, and you can get to an efficient play of, okay, what are you doing, who are you doing, and it then affects the entire business. Because at the end of the day, when you present to a board member, or you present to the CEO, you present to the executive team, or even the staff, and say, hey, by the way, you're selling 400,000 items, and you really only need to sell 4. That's a game changer. It is. It definitely tells people, okay, you now get it. Now let's go forth and prosper.
Well then, Josh, let's switch around for a second and look at this sort of 1 year engagement from the CEO or the ELT or the board's point of view, right? So besides sort of sharing information with you, which you would need, or, saying, hey, Josh speaks for me in marketing from now on. You don't have to come to me because we want to run a Facebook ad or anything else with marketing. Josh is your guy for that. Besides that stuff, like how does a CEO or how does a company get maximum value from that 1 year of financial commitment that they've made to have a fractional CMO? Or, if you've had enough bad experience with this, how do companies typically waste the money that they spend on their fractional CMO?
It's a really good question. The reality is trust the CMO, right? Yeah. It seems awfully simple, but most organizations, when they bring in a fractional, the biggest hurdle they find is they try to micromanage them. They try to steer, they try to manage it almost down to the nitty gritty because they think they need to. That's not the point of a fractional CMO, right? The fractional CMO is really usually either is filling in a gap, a person's out, or they're trying to go through a situation or something along those lines. And a lot of times the executive team, even down to the individual staff members, feel obligated to basically be like, no, you have to just do this box. The problem is most of the time the box is wrong, right? And that becomes a huge challenge. It's not insurmountable. It's just certainly, well, you're not part of my team. You're getting inserted in. I didn't interview you 4 times, or I didn't, groom with you or grow up with you for a number of years. You're essentially an insert. So the desires to actually put you into a box, that's not the point of a CMO in general. And so the idea is basically allow that person to do what they're good at, which is why I start out with understanding your customer. It gives a little bit more of a research-oriented structure that people actually tend to respond to well, and then they kind of trust you. Look, trust is not something you just give, right? You have to build it, and it takes time to build it. But the point of a fractional is to do things in a much more condensed time frame. So it's hard to say this to executive teams and say, look, you got to trust me. I hate saying that because it's actually kind of, egotistical. But the reality is it's sort of like, okay, allow me to get to the first hurdle. Then once I get to that first hurdle, then help me get past that first hurdle to the second one and to the third one. And sometimes you don't even get to them because you're actually allowed that CMO to be able to really kind of interact and engage and cultivate a relationship to allow them to be successful.
I agree. And Eric, how about you? Like, how do you find that companies can waste the money that they commit to fractional CMOs, or how do they get like every last penny of value out of whatever fractional CMO they bring on for a year?
As I look at this, I'm going to use a trite expression. You need a seat at the table. So you need to be part of the C-suite, right? So that's first thing. To echo what Joshua said, you've got to build credibility and trust. And where I see most of the waste is what I would call random acts of marketing. Mm-hmm. They do executions without a coherent theme, without a coherent structured outcome, what are our key clients, et cetera. So part of the job of a fractional CMO is to help organizations transition from I have to do this to this has to get done, right? Particularly startups are hero cultures, and marketing in particular falls into that trap quite easily. So we have to help people transition from I got to do this to this has to get done. How do we align the resources to most cost effectively get it done? So in other words, they transition from a tactical approach to getting things done to a more strategic approach to driving the same outcomes.
Okay, so let's shift focus then a little bit again. So let's say that your co-host, your co-guest, right, on this podcast says, hey, this is an unusual situation for me just because of the nature of the clients that I normally have. I just landed a 1-year gig, and Monday is going to be day 1. And unusually for me, there's already a marketing team in place. Like, junior folks and mid-level folks. There's no leadership there. Like, do you have any advice for me? Like, what should I definitely do? Like, what one thing should I definitely do? Or what one thing should I definitely not do? My first week of walking in where there's an existing team in place. Like, Eric, what do you think? What would you
One
tell
of the
John?
issues with existing teams is there's preconceptions about people.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the job is to reset to zero, evaluate, and then realign that team to be most effective. It can be a very difficult transition to realign the people to be more effective because we all have things that we like to do and the things we don't like to do. And often we think that we're great at things that we may not be as good as somebody else on the team. So it's really, let's evaluate from zero, give everybody an opportunity, and
Right.
realign them so that we can drive the outcomes we committed to drive with the C-suite and the board.
Josh, how about you? What warning or one piece of advice would you pass along to someone walking into that situation?
In the situations I've walked into, most of the time there's turmoil in the sense that the person walking out of the door, they used to
Right.
report to. In some cases, they were hired by.
Right.
So the reality is, what I always say to people, I say to every team member that I walk into, whether they're in marketing or CX or technology or supply chain or the warehouse or whatever team it is I'm here to make you successful. I'm not here to, puff my own ego. That's not my job here. Yes, I'm here to help grow the business, to stabilize the business, to get it moving where it needs to be. But I'm here to essentially make you replace me, give you the tools to replace me. It fosters a huge level of trust that you don't normally see. And that's really kind of cool. Because what it does is they're all of a sudden they're almost disarmed. They're like, wait a minute, you're essentially allowing us to replace you. Oh my gosh, you're on our side. And you're still doing, you're still evaluating the team. You're still finding their success points and identifying where they're going to be successful and putting them in that place of success. But the core element that I really focus on is, hey, let's get you to a point where you're successful. And how can you replace me? And I'm here to foster you. I'm here to grow you. The one item that I always make everybody do, to be perfectly honest, is analytics, KPIs. Set up 8 KPIs. Here you go. Everybody standardizes on those 8 KPIs. If you can't standardize on those 8 KPIs, that's an indicator.
Right.
Ask for 50. That's just not reasonable. I say, here, what are your 8 KPIs? Everybody's on it. Great. Now, here we go.
Okay, so let's go one layer into that, right? It's Friday, and you're in marketing, and you're junior or mid-level, so no one tells you anything anyway from the rest of the company, and you're already kind of abused and ignored, and unless someone has an emergency, then it's your problem, right?
Yeah.
And so you get this notice or notification or email, or someone actually has a little meeting, and they say, hey, as you go into your weekend, I just want you to know that the company has brought on a fractional CMO, and that person's going to start on Monday. And so you're like, okay, sure. Well, something else for my life. And you go Google what a fractional CMO is, because you've never heard that term before.
Yeah.
Right. And then you show up, you think about it on the weekend, so you can walk in on Monday and, either know what to expect or know what your next move should be. So, Josh, what should they expect, or what should be their first moves now that there's someone in leadership in marketing?
Well, the first thing I would like them to do is breathe, right? A lot of times, again, when you walk into a situation like that, you're like, oh my gosh, the person who was used to sit in that seat is no longer there, or is, am I on the chopping block? That's not the case. I have never walked into an organization and in the first 24 hours start firing everybody. That's not what a fractional CMO is. In fact, it's not what most businesses want either. So from my standpoint, what I say to the marketing team, and that's why I kind of build baselines, I said, look, the first step, let's just breathe, right? I'm here to make you successful. I'm here to establish a pattern. What I always do is I install, usually within the first week, 3-day meetings every other day. And then I pull back to 2, and then I pull back to 1. And they're like 30 minutes, really meant to be like 10, but and I call them stand-ups.
Right.
Just so this way everybody can hear what everybody else is working on and talk, and also hear what I'm working on. So that way there's full transparency. That's the key thing for marketing executives. I think a lot of times, unlike with warehouse teams or technology teams where they're sort of very regimented, or can be regimented, in the marketing team it's somewhat amorphous. And from my view, the really key thing that I really emphasize to them is slow down. We're going to get through this. Right? We're going to do it together. I've been there before. And you can look me up on LinkedIn. You can talk to my former students or my former colleagues, and they will all say, Josh will listen to you. Josh will be the person to get you through this, and he's going to make you successful. He's going to be your mentor. But when he says to you, he's really trying to get you to a point where you replace him or you replace him somewhere else, like you're getting grown and educated. That's really what it is. And that kind of settles people down. It almost puts them at ease. Am I going to still hold their feet to the fire? Of course I am. Not on day one. Right? Am I going to? That's why I use the KPI piece as a way just to get the structure in play. And that way you can sink or swim that way. But I emphasize to every marketing person that works for me, and technologist, and supply chain, or whatever department I'm running, be aware I'm here under circumstances to give you the ability to be successful. I'm here to keep all of that off your plate, all the politics, all the other things that are going to interfere, so you are successful. And that hopefully will put people at ease.
And Eric, how about you? If you're that junior employee, like you run the company's Facebook ads or the email newsletter or whatever, right? What should be your first move as you, let's say it's like just positive, and you say, okay, here's an opportunity for me to get inside the head or get advice from someone who's way more senior in marketing than I am, right? What should that person be sort of trying to do to capitalize on the opportunity of having someone like you in place for the next year?
My approach is to leave a place better than I found it in significant ways. Skills, capabilities, culture.
Right.
So junior people would need to take a step back, get to know the leader, understand that most of us are there to help them grow and to help enable them to be leaders themselves. So take a step back, take a deep breath, and say, analyze, how do I get the most out of this person to have them help me grow my career?
Okay. And then Eric, I have sort of one last thing. Okay. Let's go back up. This is the last question I have for you guys today. Let's go back up to the CEO or company or board level. Right? And you've brought on this fractional CMO for a year. Should the company be looking at this as a 1-year sprint, or should the company be looking at this as year one of a marathon with that fractional CMO? What do you think, Eric?
The fractional CMO, to me, should be 12 to 18 months, right? It is a new voice. It is a way to create structure. It is a way to move forward, right? But in many instances, right, once you've helped the team get to where they are, the best thing you need to do is transition out and let some of the people move up. Sorry, not out, up.
So definitely keep it in a marathon, a sprint kind of mentality. It's a long sprint, a year or even 18 months. That's a long sprint, but it's a sprint. Right? There's an end. There's an exit point.
Kind of a mid-distance run.
Yeah.
Not a sprint, but not a marathon either.
Right. Like the 400 meter, or the 1500 meter. And Josh, what about you? Should the company look at that 1-year commitment to a fractional CMO as year one of a marathon or a 1-year sprint?
The way I look at it is it's not necessarily a marathon or a sprint. I think as a fractional executive, as you walk into this as a CMO, the problem is The question is ultimately, when was the work done? Is the work consistently done? And has the message been conveyed across, in the deliverables? That's hard to do, by the way, if you're just sprinting all the time. Now they talk about, in technology terms, they have things like scrums and sprints and things like that, which are like usually a 3-month periods. That concept is tried to apply to marketing, but it doesn't really work that way. Like, yes, you can do that from a paid advertising standpoint, but when it comes to like an organic search on the digital front, that takes like 6 months just to get any kind of traction. So the problem is by putting a label on it, hey, it's a marathon, or it's a sprint. It's not to say that that's not something that you should consider. What it really should be based on is your deliverables. Are you meeting the objectives of the project? Are you meeting the objectives of what the organization is? And a lot of times, bringing a fractional CMO in creates a level of upheaval. Then if you're going to bring in another person, you're back to that upheaval. People have different styles. People have different ways of implementing things. And, as CMOs get rotated out, you may lose that momentum, or you may lose the directive that was done. So, what I always say to people is you have to look at it like, okay, what's the end goal here? Define the end goal. If that takes a year to get there, if it takes 4 years to get there, if it takes 4 months to get there, at least you defined your goal, and now you can figure out what to do next. And that's, to me, is really how I look at it. I love to be able to say to a person, it's a marathon. You have 4 years to do it all. I would love for that to happen. It's not realistic. In a lot of the situations I walk into, they're more likely to say, look, we don't have a year. We have 4 months or 5 months or 6 months, up to a year, to get this thing stabilized and get it to a place where we can, grow, and then we can have those conversations, which is a challenge by itself. But from my standpoint, the way I look at it is hit the milestones that your goals are. Try to define those goals up front, or at least within the first 90 days, and then hit those milestones. You hit those milestones, everybody feels more comfortable, and then people look at it like, okay, what's the next milestone? Oh, great. What's the next milestone? Oh, great. And that way, people then decide, okay, you know what? You're doing what we need you to do. We're going to keep you around. Then we'll slow it down. The reality is also, in one last aspect of this, a lot of times you go after low-hanging or fruit on the ground. You get those done.
Right.
Okay, then there's, near term. And you just work through that. And it takes longer and longer after you deal with the smaller items and then move to the bigger items. So that's how I really think about it, not necessarily around, are they really, like you got to run. It's okay, how do we make sure that all the different aspects of this, the team's buying in, companies responding, your customers are engaging. If that's occurring, I think most businesses will say, let's keep going.
All right. So first Josh and then Eric. Josh, who should contact you, and how should they do it? You actually have a phone number on the screen, which is pretty rare on the internet. You put your phone number on the internet. So I think we know the how, but like, who should contact you? Who's sort of in your wheelhouse?
So, it's a very good question. The way I look at it is people who are trying to either identify ways to grow and grow relatively quickly, like they're trying to reach an end goal, meaning like they're trying to sell their business, like a family-run business. They're trying to sell to private equity or venture capital. That tends to be family-run. And a lot of it is investors who, either venture capital firms or private equity firms in the mid-market or lower middle market, who are really dealing with, they're taking over companies. They may be in distress. They may be in restructuring mode. They may just need to grow, and they want somebody who knows how to grow and do it both from a technical standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, and from a cost efficiency standpoint. And then, you like to throw it out there and say, look, it's also, companies that are just looking for some diligence projects. Somebody who's looking to do a week or 2 week diligence on a potential company that they're about to invest in. And they just want a subject matter expert who's gone there and been there and worked in a variety of situations.
Right. And Eric, how about you? Who should contact you? And how?
The sweet spot for me is companies in the 20 to 500 million range. I spent a great deal of time working with Fortune 500s, yet that's really the sweet spot. And it's companies that are looking to grow, and they need to grow quickly. They need to instill process, operating models, right? And align all their channels to where their customers are, where their market is. Um, Often, what I see is companies aren't aligned, right? They get enamored with executions rather than how do I
Right.
talk to my customers. And the last piece is companies that are trying to change the conversation. What I find often is companies in an industry, in a niche, they all talk the same way. Well, if we're all talking the same way, then we're a commodity. So, how do we
Yeah.
change that conversation to get you out of the commodity and get you in to talk to decision makers because they feel you understand their pain?
All right, guys, thank you so much for being here, and hopefully you'll come back in season 3. We've got a few people from season 1 and season 2, so hopefully some you guys can come back for season 3. That's about it for me. Thanks, guys, again. Thanks, Josh. Thanks,
Thank you.
Eric.